dissuade. I knew I was in the wrong pew. Can I talk now without anything recording in progress? Okay, thank you. And so, if we're going to talk about Jewish perspectives on the issues that I've illuminated, then I think it's incumbent upon me to talk a little bit about sexuality, reproduction, before getting to the items. And also, abortion would be a part of what I'm going to be sharing with you. If you are at all familiar with the Hebrew Bible, and if you are a Christian or a Muslim, you undoubtedly are, since Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all three what are known as the Abrahamic faiths, and all three on one level and another, particularly Christianity, also claim the Hebrew Bible, what Jews call the Torah, as their own legacy. If you are familiar with Genesis 1:27, we read that God created male and female, Zachar unekeva bara otam. And then the second verse after that, verse 28 reads, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and gain dominion over it. Uru uruvu mil'u et haaretz v'chiv shuha." Now, what you see there is in reality the origins of what we call the nuclear family and how it is to be organized. Now, it's very interesting, I think, that when it comes to this particular family, who is responsible for seeing to it that children are to be bred and raised and born? Not the woman from a Jewish perspective, but the man. In other words, we already see what I would term the dominance of the phallus. Phallic supremacy reigns supreme at the very onset of the book of Genesis. Why? Because the terms themselves are in the masculine, and because when you look at the word and gain dominion over the earth, in the Hebrew, the chiv shuha, the word is couched in the feminine. So therefore, men have that responsibility. Women are considered a receptacle, a deposit, where what the man brings will be deposited, and then the whole birth process will commence. Now, how many children is one to have? What is considered appropriate? Well, from a Jewish perspective, initially, as many as possible. But what if that, after all, Peru uravu, be fruitful and multiply? There is no limit in the biblical text. However, in the rabbinic text, and it's incumbent upon you to recognize, to remember that from a Jewish perspective, what the rabbis teach, how the rabbis interpret the Hebrew Bible is paramount. Normative Judaism is not specifically biblical. It is much more rabbinic. We are not Protestants. I say that seriously because when I talk about what the rabbis have taught and do, many Jewish people are still bewildered. They really don't get it. You may recall in the 16th century, Martin Luther, who was a devout priest living in the city of Wittenberg in Germany, was so fed up with the Roman Church that he takes 95 accusations, theses, and he puts them on the wall of the church in Wittenberg. Among them, indulgences and so forth. His theme, which becomes, if I'm not mistaken, the essence of the Protestant Reformation, sola scriptura, the Latin for only the Bible. How do I know? The Bible tells me so. That was not and never has been the philosophy or the theology of Judaism. And what I'm going to share with you this evening, while it has its roots in biblical doctrines, those are reinterpreted in what Judaism calls the oral tradition, what the rabbis do, how they reinterpret, how they add or elucidate what the biblical text is saying. Well, so how many children, if you don't want to have as many as possible, are you obligated to have from a Jewish perspective? There are two different versions. One version says at least a boy and a girl, thereby you are equating Adam and Eve. The second version, interestingly enough, says no, you must have two boys. And why must you have two boys rather than one of each gender? Well, this particular rabbi, who was named Shammai, because Moses had two sons. So therefore, if Moses had two sons, who was the leader of our people, it becomes incumbent upon each of us to equate what he was able to do. Now, you know, males, certainly then, there was no medical science to corroborate or to reject it, always thought that they were never infertile. They were never impotent. So consequently, if children could not be born, it was their wives' fault. And there is a tradition. It was never enforced. It was encouraged, but I want to stress, it was never enforced. If you were married for 10 years, and at the end of 10 years, your wife had not born an offspring, then if you wished, you could divorce her. I say if you wished, it was voluntary, although depending upon the rabbi of that particular period, conceivably, he might have been more insistent that you do that. Now, that was more probable in Christian Europe than in Muslim Europe, because in Muslim Europe, bigamy was permitted. In Christian Europe, it was not. And so Jews in Muslim Europe for many centuries did what their Muslim brothers and sisters did, their brothers did certainly, was to have more than one wife, and therefore you could procreate, hopefully. But that was not the case in Christian Europe, where that was a taboo. Now, there were also a great many laws regarding sexual activity between a husband and his wife. I'm not going to titillate you with all of them, but I do want to share a few which I think were very, very important. For example, husbands must initiate all sexual activity. Wives were to be modest, humble, and whatever their desires, to refrain from being too overt in their manifestations of desire. On the other hand, husbands were obligated to see to it that they made love to their wives. The longest according to the rabbis, that a husband could abstain from making love to his wife was a maximum of 2 weeks, no more than that. Moreover, and this I'm not going to share with you this evening, moreover, depending upon your occupation, depending upon the frequency of your presence in your home, how often you were obligated to make love to your wife varied in keeping with what kind of profession or job, etc., you had. So I think that's a very important series of, now let me add something else. Contraception was available, and contraception was considered mandatory, necessary under the following circumstances. There were three categories of women who could use what they called a moch, M-O-K-H. It was not the kind of prophylactic that we are familiar with that males utilize. It was something a woman would insert, made of cloth or a sponge-like apparatus in order to deflect a male's semen. The three were a minor, a pregnant, and a nursing woman. The minor, lest she become pregnant. A pregnant woman, because there was a belief that if you had sexual intercourse with your wife who was pregnant, it would somehow damage and hurt the fetus, and therefore it was not forbidden. And a nursing woman, because somehow it would incapacitate her ability to lactate and to nurse the child. And then there are all kinds of rules and regulations dealing with all of that, which I will not go through this evening, but I wanted you to be aware of some of the sexual background and orientation which characterized Jewish life. And then I thought, I once did a study of the definition of the family. If I were to ask you, how would you define the family? Are you content with the way we know the old symbol, a man, a husband, a wife, 2 kids, and a dog named Spot? That used to be sort of symbolic of what constituted the family. The word from the Latin, curiously enough, which meant slavery. People who are enslaved under the aegis of the pater, necessarily. I like 2. There are others, but I'm just going to share 2 with you. One, a group of 2 or more persons residing together who are related by blood, marriage, or adoption. Contemporaneously, and given what we are going to be talking about a little more in depth very shortly, how about this one? Family, the diverse means by which people organize their intimate relationships. A very interesting way. Now, having shared all of that with you, there are many differences between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but as Abrahamic faiths, there is one idea that they all share, at least in their origins, and it relates to women. Judaism, Genesis 3:16, your urge shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Christianity, Ephesus 5:23, the husband is head of the wife as Christ is head of the church. Islam, the Quran, Surah, which means chapter 4:34, men are the protection and maintainers of women. Therefore, righteous women are devoutly obedient. One or 2 other characterizations of wives by their husbands, by the rabbis. Women in the tradition are referred to as houses, as houses. The Hebrew term for a house is bayit. Okay, so you're going to ask, well, why in the world would women be referred to as a house? Well, I'm going to quote, this is from the Talmud, one of the profound rabbinic doctrines. Just as there are, I'm quoting, just as there are hinges for a house, so there are hinges for a woman. Just as there are doors to a house, so there are doors to a woman. Just as there is a key to a house, so there is a key to a woman. Because a woman has openings and orifices and places of penetration, therefore, that is how they are called in the Talmud. Now, let me do one other thing, because they are very significant, which we are prone to forget. Salvific roles for women in Judaism, and it spills over into Christianity as well. For example, those of you who know the story in the book of Genesis of the fourth son of Jacob and Leah, who is named Judah, his daughter-in-law, whom he named Tamar, is very unhappy with the two husbands that she previously had, his sons, because they refuse to procreate with her. One of them is named Onan, and Onanism is derived from him, and so forth and so on. And Judah is concerned, one of the sons of Jacob, one of the critical sons of Israel. And so Tamar is equally concerned and decides to pose as a prostitute, where she stations herself at the gates of the town, knowing that Judah will pass by. Judah passes by, is seduced by her, engages in sex with her, and ultimately, when he is convinced that she is to be burned as a witch because of her engaging in what she has just done, realize who she is, and realizes that it is only because of her that the seed can continue. And her seed does continue together, and among others, they are responsible for the birth of Boaz. Now, why is Boaz so important? Well, then we have to look at another story in the book of Genesis again. And that now we're talking about the story of Lot and his daughters. Lot and his daughters flee from Sodom. Remember, Lot's wife looks back and, according to the tradition, is turned into a pillar of salt. But the three of them escape. And the two daughters are convinced that they are the only survivors in the entire world. It reminded me years ago, if you saw Ava Gardner and Gregory Peck and On the Beach, where they were convinced that after a nuclear explosion, there were no other survivors. Well, they're convinced of that. And they want to see to it that the earth will be inhabited again. And if you read the text, on the first night, the older daughter inebriates Lot, and once inebriated, she sleeps with him, she seduces him, she's impregnated, and she bears a son named Moab, which means from my father. And the second night, the younger daughter reciprocates, does the same thing. He is intoxicated once again. I'm not making it up. It's all in the Bible. You can read it. And she too bears a son named Ammon, from my people. And the rabbis do not condemn her. Why do the rabbis not condemn her? And why do the rabbis not condemn Judah? Because in both instances, what they have done will ultimately lead to the birth of King David. If you trace the genealogy, ultimately a daughter of Moab named Ruth will marry Boaz, etc. And through that union, two things will happen. If you read the Gospel of Matthew, in particular of all the synoptic Gospels, you will discover that if you trace the genealogy, it will begin even before David, Jesse, Boaz, Jesse, all the way to Christ Jesus, who was from the Davidic house. And if you read the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, will come from the house of David as well. And so in both instances, the messianic coming is incumbent, think about it for a moment, is incumbent, depending upon your theology, is dependent upon incest, and in a second instance is dependent upon a seduction by Ruth of Boaz. Think about it. Think about it. Now, having shared all of that with you, I want to do one other thing, and then I want to but I wanted to give you this background, which I think is very important. I've alluded to the Muslim world. We know that in the Muslim world, there were Jews who engaged in homosexuality openly as part of the culture. I'm talking about the period of the 12th and 13th centuries. The relationship between Jews and Muslims was warm, was friendly. It was a time called convivencia, which is Spanish for interaction, interfaith cooperation, etc. I want to read two poems which express the kind of sexual world that we are talking about in the 12th centuries in Andalus, in Spain. I'll give you the names of the poets, Hebrew poets, Solomon ibn Gabiro, Moses ibn Ezra, Yehuda Halevi. I'm giving you the translation of the Hebrew, which was rhymed, and so the author of the book containing these poems chose to rhyme the English as well, to keep it with the Hebrew. Caress a lovely woman's breast by night, kiss some beauty's lips by morning's light, laugh, dance, stamp your feet upon the floor, get drunk, and knock at dawn at some girl's door. Or this one. He listened and let me come home with him. He did what I wanted, obeyed every whim. By day and by night, we dallied within. I took off his clothes, he took off mine. He offered his lips. I drank of their wine. Just when my heart was no longer free, just then he started to find fault with me. He quarreled and spoke to me angrily. Get along with you, be on your way. Don't you seduce me and lead me astray. With that background, which I think is very important, I want to talk about terminating a pregnancy. It is a very obviously current issue, politicized. The overturn of Roe v. Wade, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Organization, all kinds of political implications. Mr. Trump has just stated that there are only two genders, male and female. So I want to talk about it from a Jewish perspective. I do want to begin by, again, being so unhappy with words like pro-life, pro-choice, which immediately skews the conversation, creates and condemns certain people, and by definition, hails and praises other people, when in reality, both Judaism and Christianity are pro-life, each in their own way. When pregnancy in Judaism, historically, contemporaneously, is treasured, is in the medieval world in particular, when there were such fears of pregnancies not coming to term, and there were fears of evil spirits, demons entering a house and stealing an infant, and there were amulets and charms and sayings. The rabbis say, if your wife is pregnant and has a craving, I don't know, I asked Rita earlier today, did she ever have a craving? And say it's the Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the Jewish year. You're supposed to fast. And she says, darling, I can't help it. I got to have a ham sandwich. Well, you're going to do your best to discourage her. Don't do it. But what if she insists? You get her a ham sandwich. Or what if her water breaks? You got to have it doesn't matter what day of the year it is. It doesn't matter if it's the holiest day of the Jewish year. It doesn't matter if the Sabbath. It's all irrelevant. That's how important giving birth really is. And to call it murder, you've already skewed it all. So let me try and deal with it. And in the process of doing so, I will have to contrast the Catholic and the Jewish perspective, because I think, and here I speak more out of ignorance than knowledge, I think depending upon the Protestant denomination, it may vary. Not all Christianity will reject summarily abortion. So let me tell you that many years ago, when I was a rabbi in a congregation, I was asked to participate with a Catholic priest in a discussion. You've been to some of these discussions, I suspect, in previous years. What are the differences between Judaism and Christianity, and so forth and so on. And so during the question and answer period, somebody in the audience raised their hand and said to the priest, Father, would you explain why if a mother is giving birth and it's found that she's not well, and either the baby or she must die, one is in the terrible situation where you can't save both mother and infant, what is the Catholic teaching? And the priest was quite responsive, and he said, well, we believe that if we have to make that awful, awful choice, the mother must be sacrificed and the infant must be saved. Well, why? Why? And he said, well, you know that as Christians, we are born in sin. And because we are born in sin, when a baby is baptized after he or she is born, the sin is removed. However, a fetus being unborn cannot be baptized. And we must see, unborn cannot be baptized. A mother has already been baptized. She will not go to perdition. When she dies, she will go to heaven. And ultimately, when the entire family dies, she will be reunited with her child. But the baby, the infant, unless it is delivered, will go to perdition. And we cannot allow that fetus to suffer unbaptized that kind of travail. And so therefore, we must save the child and consign the mother. And so then I was asked the same question. And I said, well, you know, Judaism does not believe that one is born in sin. On the contrary, Judaism believes that one is born pure. As a matter of fact, daily in the morning worship service in the synagogue, early in the service, there is a prayer which begins, Elohai neshama shenotata bi tehorahi. O Lord, you have implanted within us a soul of purity. You have formed it, you have created it, and at the appointed time, you will take it from my body. So consequently, no infant is born in sin. And as a matter of fact, the morning service itself, where this liturgical piece is located, is called shacharit. It means morning. It also means freedom in the Hebrew. And if you think about its purpose and significance, each morning is special. Each morning is new. As a newborn, or even as someone older, I have a new opportunity to live. I have a new chance to experience new things and live my life to the fullest. And this would be incomprehensible. As a matter of fact, and I will tell you, I was raised by my grandmother, and until I recited what I'm going to recite for you right now, I got no breakfast. What a Jew is supposed to recite upon rising in the morning, Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam, I give thanks unto you, eternal God, shechazarta bi nishmati b'chemla, that you have returned my soul in compassion. Rabba amunatecha, how grand and great is your faithfulness, is your faithfulness. Now, what about then the question of ensoulment? After all, it's murder. It's murder. Well, is it? For Christians, conception, at least according to Christian doctrine or Catholic doctrine, is the onset of life. For Judaism, and the distinction I want to emphasize is very exact. It is potential life. Potential life. Why? What's the distinction? Well, there are two differences from a Jewish perspective. One, the fetus is not an independent entity in the womb by any stretch of the imagination. The fetus is tied to the mother. With no mother, the fetus will not survive. In the Hebrew, the expression is ubar yerech imo, which means the fetus is an extension of the mother's thigh. Pars viscerum matris in the Latin. And so potential dependency upon the mother is a very different and distinct distinction that's between potential life and full life. As a matter of fact, the rabbis, they were not medical scientists by any stretch of the imagination, called the first 40 days of the life of a fetus water. However valid or invalid that might have been, that was their understanding. Now, there's another basis. The ensoulment doctrine that I have just touched upon is not found in the Hebrew Bible. It is found in the Greek Bible. It is found in the Septuagint, where there is a mistranslation of the Hebrew text. Now, you know, one of the historic mistranslations of the Hebrew text in the Christian Bible, in the book of Isaiah, is where the virgin birth is stipulated, again found in the Septuagint. But the Hebrew alma in the prophet Isaiah refers to a young woman, but that has been maintained for centuries. Similarly, if you look at the book of Exodus, the second book of the Hebrew Bible, chapter 21, verses 22 to 23. I'm just going to, you can write it down if you like and look at it, but I'm just going to do it without reading it directly. In essence, it says this: if two men are fighting, and in the process of fighting with one another, and there happens to be a woman who is pregnant standing next to them, one of the men inadvertently strikes the woman. She falls. She's pregnant, and she miscarries in the process. But she is not hurt. She is not hurt. Then the culprit who struck the other man and the inadvertent bumping into the woman and made her fall, etc., can be fined for doing this. There's a monetary fine. If the woman dies, a death for a death. There is no mention if you look at the book of Exodus, no mention of the fetus. No mention whatsoever. However, in the Greek text, the referral to the woman is changed, and the Greek refers instead to the fetus. If it dies, it is called murder. So there is a total distinction between one to the other. But there is also another reason. Remember a few moments ago, I indicated that from a Jewish perspective, from a rabbinic perspective, the fetus can survive only because of its link to the mother in the womb, in utero. Its link to the mother. Supposing there is something very seriously medically wrong with the fetus, and if the pregnancy comes to term, it could well kill the mother. What does one do from a Jewish perspective? According to Judaism, should a terrible situation like that take place, the fetus, in order to save the mother's life, as long as the fetus remains in utero, the fetus must be aborted, because the life of the mother must be spared. Now, the moment the fetus head emerges, no more. The fetus, now a baby, must live. Must live. Nothing can be done. And if, for some medical reason, at that point, once the baby has come to term, if the mother dies, that is a great tragedy. But there has been no effort, once a baby has attained life, to do anything about it. Now you can ask, well, what about a different kind of situation? What about a situation where the baby has survived, but the baby is born blind or crippled, has Down syndrome, or has any of a multitude of serious afflictions, and the infant may be burdened with those ailments, those limitations throughout his or her life. What then? Very interesting. Over the centuries, that has depended upon the determination of the rabbi. In ancient times, in medieval times, and even in contemporary times. That is, one example. Let's assume the mother is suffering from a postpartum depression of such seriousness that unless something is done, she may die. She is that acutely depressed because of the condition of the baby. This baby, the baby is blind, the baby has no arm, whatever it may happen to be. I cannot tolerate it. Doctor, rabbi, you've got to do something. There are no hard and fast rules. If there is a determination that the baby can only live a very limited time, perhaps. But I would argue that today, that becomes rarer and rarer. In this day and age, there is no rabbinic way for the most part. You will have to live with the reality of what has transpired and grow with it. So in essence, that is the story of the Jewish perspective on terminating a pregnancy and the circumstances governing that particular act. I want to move now to homosexuality, lesbianism, gender identity. I want to quote two passages again from the Hebrew Bible, both in the book of Leviticus. First, Leviticus 18:22. Do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. The difference in 2013 is that what is added is it is punishable by stoning. In the traditional synagogue, it is read usually on the Day of Atonement. That is not deviated. I happened to turn to Romans in the Christian Bible, Romans 1:26-7, where Jesus is quoted as speaking of dishonorable passions. Women exchanged natural relations for unnatural. Men likewise gave up natural relations with women with passion for one another, committing shameful acts. Now, what is very interesting is, why are women not mentioned specifically in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Leviticus, when talking about men, what men do? Well, remember before I talked about how women are viewed? Well, it's interesting. There are passages talking about lesbianism more in the rabbinic literature than in the biblical material. And they use a very interesting phrase. Women are sporting with one another. Sporting with one another. In the Hebrew word is masololot, messing around. Okay? That's a less fancy term. Messing around. You know what they're doing is not nice. It's disgraceful. They shouldn't do things like that. They should know better. They're just trying to be willful and they're trying to be wanton, but it really doesn't mean anything else. Not a darn thing. The only thing that they can't do is marry a priest. Not a Catholic priest, obviously, is to marry a member of the Jewish priesthood in biblical times. That they are precluded from. But anything else, you better get married. Why are you doing this? This is nonsense. And it's a violation of the natural order of things. Why were women treated that way traditionally? Well, there were a number of reasons. It's a male-dominated culture. So why would women even want to bother with one another? Isn't that ridiculous? Or, women want to be mothers. That's the sine qua non of their lives. So, so what they're doing, it's silly, and so forth. And that's how the tradition, and I don't know how true this is. I think most women, if they did engage in the biblical and rabbinic world in lesbian activities, did it secretly or never came out of the closet, if you will. But certainly this was the perspective that obtained historically. Now, I'm still dealing not contemporaneously. I'm still dealing historically. What about transgender? Well, you think the rabbis knew nothing about that? No, you're absolutely wrong. If you read not the biblical material, but the rabbinic material in the worlds of which they were a part, they list and talk about 6 variations of gender. 6, male and female. Then they talk about individuals whose genitalia seem to be mixed and are not confined to one gender. They talk about persons whose genitalia are recessed and it's unclear as to what gender they truly are. They talk about men who act like women. They will not dress like women, but they act like women. They talk about women who act like men, etc. And there is a lengthy, in various rabbinic books and journals, lengthy discussions academically of how these people are to be, what they can observe, what they cannot observe, and so forth and so on. But the overriding criterion is male, female. In other words, these people are not permitted and do not expect to be permitted to engage in what their personas seem to convey. Not at all, but rather, there are what ifs. What would we do? And there are many passages in the rabbinic material that are hypothetical, that are merely there to talk about certain components and aspects of life which are never fully implemented. It's also incumbent upon us not to forget there are no medical possibilities of changing ones. There's no transgender surgery that is even conceivable, and they can't even think of the day when that would happen. All right. Having shared that with you, let me go to modernity and what we are dealing with, where it's a very, very different world in which we live. I want to do one other thing, which I think is important in this regard, going into the tradition. You know, there are stories about David and Jonathan being in love, although it is never fully articulated. It is left to the discretion or the interpretation of the individual. But, curious, you all know the story of Joseph. Coat of many colors, so on and so forth. That's a very different story. Joseph, and you know the story in the book of Genesis. He is the most gorgeous man, according to the text, that ever lived. He was so beautiful, not handsome, beautiful, that there is one rabbinic text. You know, he was hired by Potiphar and Potiphar's wife as a servant. And the rabbis say that secretly Potiphar was gay and wanted to have him as his partner. At the same time, Potiphar's wife finds him so attractive that she wants to seduce him. And apparently she gave a party one day for her girlfriends. She gave a tea party, and Joseph walks in. And when the women see him, they are so overwhelmed by this good-looking, well, beautiful is a better term, that they were holding teacups, and they cracked them in their hands by the emotions that he engendered just by looking at him. So he could have been, and maybe he was gay, or we don't know. But I'm not making anything up. The rabbis say he used makeup, etc. Uh, I share that with you as another free interpretation. All right, let me talk about the current situation. Gays and lesbians. As far as Reform Judaism is concerned, as far as conservative Judaism concerned, gays, men and women, gays, lesbians, transgender are all welcomed into synagogues. Gays, lesbians, transgenders are all permitted to become rabbis, to become cantors, to become academics in Jewish academia, and so forth. Orthodoxy is another story, which I will come to in a minute, but I want to emphasize that those attitudes and restrictions no longer exist. As a matter of fact, the Rabbinical Association, I'm a Reform rabbi, and the Rabbinical Association, of which I am a member, next week is having its convention in Chicago. And one of the items on the agenda is to take stock of if any members of this rabbinic organization who are gay or lesbian or transgender have either found it difficult to get a pulpit or have been treated badly because of their identities with congregants, with members of the board of the congregation, etc. They want to know. So I want to stress that, which is very important. The Orthodox world is still struggling with all of the above. There is a very well-known conservative rabbi, gay, named Rabbi Stephen Greenberg, who has created an organization called Eshel. Eshel in Hebrew means a tamarisk tree. In the Bible, Abraham plants an Eshel, a tamarisk tree, because it can withstand weather, it can withstand all kinds of issues that other trees could not survive. And he also, he wrote a book called Wrestling with God, where he bases the theme on the famous story, again, in the book of Genesis, where Jacob wrestles with an angel and is triumphant. There are any number of organizations in this country, organizations in Israel, like Eshel, which cater to the needs and the concerns of devout, and there are devout Orthodox Jews who want to remain Orthodox Jews and who don't want to hide in the closet. And he did a survey. Greenberg did a survey where he found, at least on the basis of what he discovered, that 58% of Jews identifying as Orthodox would welcome gay Jews who are open by their identities and feel that they no longer have to hide. And as you know, there in Israel are gay pride marches, etc. Although there are times in Israel when a gay pride takes place, one must be careful because there are still those who will engage in violence against those who are open about their identities. There are special wedding ceremonies created not only by Greenberg, but by a number of Jewish scholars, one woman in particular, Rachel Adler, by the Reform movement, and there are also Jewish, not only the wedding license ceremony, but the ketubah, what we call the wedding license, specifically geared for gays, for lesbians, and for the transgender. I want to talk in conclusion. I know I've been talking too long, and I apologize. You know the old joke. Someone once said that generally speaking, rabbis are generally speaking. So I haven't disavowed that particular dilemma. However, what about transgender surgery among the Orthodox? That remains a very difficult problem. There was a book written a number of years ago by an Israeli rabbi named Aden Ben Ephraim. He calls it Dor Tahapuchot. In English, it means a perverse generation. He bases it on a phrase in Deuteronomy 22, verses 20 to 21, and I'm quoting, "The Lord said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be. They are a pervasive generation." And yet, when you read the book itself, he is far less condemnatory than it would appear from the way the book opens and proceeds. And even though no transgender surgery has yet to occur in Israel itself, I don't know if and when it will take place. I don't know what would have happened, for example, if the Hamas war wouldn't have happened. But we can't know right now. But right now, although what is very interesting, in Haifa, 5 years ago, now that's before the Hamas war, etc., in Haifa, there was an individual who, not in Israel, but somewhere else, had a transgender procedure done, had once been a woman and became a man. What was fascinating is that her former husband had filed for divorce after that had taken place. And the court, the divorce court, and this is a religious court. In Israel itself, for Jews who divorce, there's no civil divorce, it's religious divorce. The court insisted that the woman, formerly a man, signed the divorce, allowing her former husband, should he wish, to remarry. Other things have taken place too in the tradition. And I'm going to give you examples in conclusion of some of them. Can a woman put on a talit, a prayer shawl? Can a woman put tefillin on, phylacteries? And the answer is, in Israel, if you were a woman and are now a man, yes, but you cannot recite a blessing. You can do it, but you cannot recite a blessing. Can someone be called to the Torah, regardless of your gender? The answer is it's okay. Because once upon a time in Jewish history, it was done, and then it was not done. There's a phrase in Hebrew, mipnei darkei shalom, etc. So there are little things that have taken place. And I would suggest that on the basis of this, things are changing. It's going to take a while. Well, enough. I hope you have found some of these comments helpful, enlightening, and I would like to close with the following. There is a phrase in an older Reform prayer book that I think captures what I hope I have tried to share this evening, and for whatever the reasons, is no longer in the text. I share it with you tonight in the hope that understanding and compassion and meaning will replace hatred and bigotry. Lord, open our eyes that we may see and welcome all truth, whether shining from the annals of ancient revelation or reaching us through the seers of our own time. For thou hidest not thy light from any generation of thy children that yearn for thee and seek thy guidance. To which I can only say, Amen, Amen. Thank you very much.
You're the star. You're not getting out of my way. Once again, I'm Martin Reichgott. I'm the Director of Philanthropy here. And we talk about this every time Rabbi comes and speaks. This is timeless for us. This building has been here for 115 years, and we bring the energy, we bring these conversations. These are timeless for building community. And part of our mission is collaboration, is this collaborative work to make sure that we connect with all groups and understand and look at it through our filter and listen to other groups. And this is the energy that we demand here. We always, always value these words. And in this space, it reminds us what we bring to the community and what we're asking to support other groups. So thank you again, Rabbi, for continuing to educate us and sharing our perspective on these current events, which, as you pointed out, are as old as the Bible, right? These are not new, and we have to continue to learn from them and continue to go forth and make sure that we care for one another. So thank you again, and thank you all online and for those who came, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event.